I've been streaming RA2 for a few days, and since day one I've had a ton of people asking me how I'll possibly beat the Crocodile Priestess with 4 stars. While I think that's because people don't know how much damage some 4 stars do, I can understand the doubt. It's a huge DPS check versus a boss with 400,000 health and 1000 defense that gets progressively more damage reduction as their health goes down, up to 100%. And worst of all, you only have 5 minutes. How could 4 stars possibly pass the DPS check? Well, Cutter, obviously. Yesterday I fought the boss over several hours before getting my win, and since so many people asked me about it, I think I should break down the fight for those who are still struggling with it. Okay, so beyond being a huge stat stick, the Crocodile Priestess has 2 mechanics. She starts with around 1000 attack, and each hit does about 40% more damage. This does not reset when switching targets, but resets if they are stunned, frozen or levitated. Kind of like Manfred with stuns, but more crowd controls work. As for their damage reduction, it increases as they lose health. At 50% health they have 100% damage reduction from sources that aren't blocking them, so you have to do them. You can think of them like the Crocodile champions from Gavio's event, it's basically the same thing. Finally, before you can even fight the boss, you have to kill all of the trash the map throws at you. There's technically 6 waves on the map, and they are all Q gated, meaning the next one won't start until you kill the current one. That's the fight itself, except one detail. There are actually 2 versions of the map, depending on the season you fight it in. In the drought seasons, which is almost certainly the one in which you will first reach this map, the map will be full of ground tiles, so you can deploy your melee operators easily, but there will be a heat wave periodically stunning your operators. If you wait until the drought ends, the entire map will be flooded, and only a few melee tiles will be left. You can counter the flooding by crafting floaters in the base, but wood cost aside, they also cost a lot of DP when you need to drop a ton of them. Whether you want to deal with the stun or flooding is up to you. I beat it during the drought myself, and the rest of the video will cover that version. There's one more thing I should mention about the map. It has an unusual design for a timed RA map. Any enemy you kill stays dead, meaning if you kill all the trash and go into the map again, the boss will spawn right away. So the trash doesn't matter then. Not quite. While the enemies don't regenerate for every attempt, like other maps, they fully reset and the boss gets healed to full at the end of every day. Meaning if you want to do the map in several attempts, you have to do it in one day. So knowing all this, here is what I did to prepare. I prepared 2 separate squads. The first one had multiple vanguards and AoE operators like Ethan, Estelle, Hummus. Its job was to delete the trash waves as quickly as possible, so we hopefully only have the DPS check boss in my second attempt. My second squad was meant to tank and DPS down the boss. I used Cutter as my DPS and brought basically an entire squad to support her. Meteor to reduce defense, May and Click to stun the boss and reset its attack buff, Roberta so we can use shields to absorb the boss attacks, Moose to reduce the boss attack. You may notice that almost all of these are meant to keep Cutter alive instead of killing the boss. This is because Cutter is very fragile, so I had to be careful. 3 attacks in a row would always skill. Any kind of consistent crowd control like Chen's one would make it a lot easier to tank the boss. On day 21 you unlock the option to send operators on a permanent mission that gives you a bonus depending on their class. Most of these aren't terribly relevant, but vanguards and casters give initial DP and initial SP. Extremely helpful for dealing with the trash waves in this fight. Make sure you at least have those buffs on. Though when I did it I had all 6 combat buffs on. One more thing before we get to the fight is the devices you bring to the fight. There is a bit of iron right before the boss fight, and you can buy iron for a relatively low price from the shop, if you have it upgraded enough. This will give you access to a ton of various devices that you can use to make the fight easier. SP devices, stun bombs, stun immunity. These things aren't strictly necessary even for 4 stars, but they will definitely make the fight easier. Also, make sure you bring plenty of ranged tiles if you want to use ranged operators. The natural ones are very limiting. Honestly, the ranged tiles at 5 wood are so cheap. I always carry 15 of them and throw them all over the place on every map. Since one operator will essentially have to 1v1 the boss, consider giving them a damage buff food. 1 purple meat plus 2 big meats gives you a massive attack buff. Finally, make sure you start the fight after the game is saved. That way if you have to reset, you minimize the things you need to repeat beforehand. Finally, the stage itself. When people told me about the stage and its difficulty, I think they really underplayed what a pain the trash waves are and just talked about the boss instead. It was the opposite in my experience. Most of my time was spent dealing with the trash instead of the boss. The trash waves are also the reason the map is hard to do in one attempt, and I suggest splitting it in two. It's not impossible, but even with 6 stars you would have to be efficient and deliberate to pull it off. As I mentioned, there are technically 6 waves on the map. Each one must be killed before the next one. The first one, and every other one after that, is a single crocodile sniper spawning from the middle left box. It's only one enemy, but you need to get rid of them ASAP, otherwise you are wasting time. Once you kill the innocent victim, several hundred enemies will spawn from every other box on the map. They will patrol around the map, looking for operators to fight, but first they will converge in this area. You can set up your squad and fight them all as they come here, but that was too slow for my tastes. Instead I chose to camp every box with a few operators. Once you're done with the second wave, you will get a lone sniper again, and then a similar wave but with more elites mixed in. All the dangerous enemies are on the rightmost side, so just add some extra DPS there if needed. One more sniper, and then we reach the 6th wave. This one contains the boss, and you most likely won't have enough time to deal with the boss here, so just focus on killing their support. Most of the boxes throw crocodile champions that become invincible to enemies that aren't blocking them when they get blocked. There are also 2 very large groups of ranged enemies, snipers on the leftmost box and a ton of casters on the rightmost side. I prioritize the ranged enemies over the crocodile champions, because they could be dealt with in the second attempt without much issue. With all of the waves exhausted, we go into the second attempt and now we have 5 full minutes to kill the boss. You might find more success rushing the boss in the center, while they AFK, but for my 4 stars I didn't have enough DP to do that. Instead I prepared to fight the boss on the left, where all the enemies move to. I gave Cutter SP devices, prepared Roberta for a shield, a medic, 2 sources of stun, and once the boss was blocked, I used the anti-stun devices to prevent the boss from walking away while Cutter was stunned. Looking back, I could have achieved the same effect with Gravel, but hey, if it works, it works. From there I just cycled Roberta devices, stun skills, stun bombs, while Cutter chopped the boss into pieces. The boss has an attack interval of 2.5 seconds, which is relatively fast for a high attack enemy. If she ever hit Cutter twice without a Roberta device ready, I would use a stun bomb, since I knew the 3rd hit kills Cutter. With a good setup, the boss is neither a hard DPS check or a hard to tank. I didn't damage the boss at all during my first attempt, and even messed up and had Cutter die during the winning attempt, but none of that made any difference. I still killed the boss with plenty of time to spare. Just treat it like a raid boss and invest all the tools you have into killing it. It's the biggest roadblock you will face in a long time, so don't be afraid to go overboard.